the channel. I've got Briston Lowry with me again, and we're going to go over Koshi Nage, or hip throw technique in Aikido. Normally we've been putting out sword videos, which I'll put a link up above, but now we're going to switch gears and do a Koshi Nage video. So if you haven't seen the how to roll and how to do a break fall, I suggest you watch those before watching this Koshi Nage video. Okay, so in teaching Koshi Nage, I'm going to break it down into the 4 components that you need to know to be able to do a good hip throw. And the reason I'm doing that is for a beginner, you can break down those techniques piece by piece and develop the skill to be able to do that. And if you're an advanced practitioner and you already know how to do this, by breaking down the different skills, you can maybe find one that you're not so proficient at, work on that, and improve your skill overall. Now, the first and one of the most important skills that you're going to have is extension, or extending his body. Now, what do I mean by that? So no matter what style of Koshi Nage I'm going to do, whether it's Shio-Nage, Ikkyo, Nikkyo, Sankyo, whatever, I'm going to have to extend his body. And what I mean by that is I'm going to have to extend his weight onto his toes while I'm positioning myself to throw him. Easiest position to learn is from a Sankyo position. So I'm going to show this from a Sankyo position. As a beginner, I suggest you start with that position first. Difficulty is I'm going to be moving towards his center, and at the same time I'm moving towards his center, I've got to be extending him in this direction. So I don't want to come in, I'm extending, and then I pull him back, and then I'm coming into the position. So what's difficult is I have to extend him into this position. As I am rotating into position, I'm keeping this extension going. And the Sankyo is really good for that because I can extend my wrist, extends his position. I've got this arch in his arm, so it makes it easier to keep the extension than some of the other techniques. So I want to extend him. I'm going to keep this extension going out that way, and then I'm going to be able to pick him up. I want to show extension from different positions or different techniques. So because the extension's a little bit different in how you create that extension. For example, if I'm going to do Koshi Nage from, say, an Ikkyo position, it's a little bit different because I don't have as much extension on this arm because I'm pulling this arm towards me. So I've got to have my extension in my opposite hand. So what I'm going to do is come in, I'm going to push out with this arm, that's going to be my extension. So as I load and rotate, this is going to be the extension right here on this arm. So if I'm holding like this, this is going to be my main extension arm. Let's say I'm doing Koshi Nage from Shio-Nage position. So the same thing, it's even more difficult because as I step under to do the technique, I've got to extend his body in like a Shio-Nage position. So I've got to extend as I drop and as I pick up. So I've got to have the same extension out that way, but Shio-Nage is a little more difficult. Okay, so same thing with Jiu Jitsu, or this position. I'm going to use this arm to extend him out, so it's even more difficult with Jiu Jitsu, I think. So as I come in, Jiu Jitsu, I'm going to keep this extension out that way. Keep the extension. I'm going to come in, fit into position, keep the extension, extend out, and then pick out. So I have to extend either way. I have to keep extending while I'm loading the body. So the second principle is positioning. I have to get my hips in the right position to be able to do that. And that is generally, not always, but generally, if his legs are in this direction, my legs have to come in at an opposite, or perpendicular to his position, because I've got to load his hips on my hip. So as I'm coming in to where I want my center line to drop right in front of his center line. So this would be the correct position to be in for the Koshi Nage. Now this is easy if I am coming in directly to throw him into position. It's really easy to get the right position. But what's difficult is when I'm entering from the backside. I am entering in this manner to enter in to do the Koshi Nage. It's very simple, and I suggest starting with that type of throw before starting with the next throw, which is more difficult. More difficult is as I'm coming in, instead of stepping under and loading this way, I'm going to step in, I'm going to rotate as I'm loading. That's a more difficult throw. So if I'm coming in, like with Ikkyo, I've got to not only come in, but I've got to have my rotation rotating in front of his center. At the same time, I'm rotating as I'm getting in position. So I suggest doing that after you get more advanced, this rotation into position. Now the third principle is compress or squat. Okay, what do I mean by that? Well, as I'm coming into this position, as I'm getting my hips into position, I've got to squat at the same time. Okay, so as I'm rotating in, I'm fitting in and I'm squatting or compressing, because that's going to give my power for my throw is lifting out of this squat. It's more difficult if I'm coming in and rotating at the same time, because I've got to come in, rotate into position, and squat all at the same time. So for Koshi Nage to work as effortlessly as possible, I've got to take my center, and rotate his center of gravity over that center line perfectly. And what do I mean by that? Now, finding my center is really easy. If I cut myself in half perfectly, that's where my center is, or my center line, where I'm going to pivot him over that center line. So I'm going to represent that by this belt just hanging from the center line so you can see it when we do the technique. Okay, usually finding the center of the other person, or your uke, is done through trial and error. But what I want to do is I want to show you the concept of it so that when you're loading the person and you're not getting it right, you know what's not right about the technique. So how do you find the center point in your partner? Well, this is to give you a visual idea of what that is. It's generally where the belt is. See, if he lifts his body up on this bar, he has just as much mass up here to equal the mass down there. So this is the point that you want to rotate that person over. It makes it the easiest for Koshi Nage. So now what I want to do is I want to show that I've got to load him in his center point, and to do that I've got to squat down, and I also want to load him in the center of my body as well. So to do that, as I come into this position, if I just come in and I pull him over, I can do it, but it's much harder on my body and his body. So what I've got to do is I've got to come into position, extend him out, and I'm going to squat, because I've got to squat into position. So I've got to squat into position to where this line is in his center point, so that when I load him and rotate over and pick him up, I've got him in the center point of my body, and I'm balancing him with equal weight here, equal weight over here. Now what I want to do is I want to put everything together with the rotation and the throw at the end, so it all kind of makes sense. So I'm going to start out. I'm going to start extending his body as I'm coming in. As I'm coming in, I'm going to be loading, I'm squatting as I'm coming in, and then I'm putting my knees together, and then as I rotate over, I've got this position. He's actually got a little more force going, so if I let go of him, he's going to fall automatically. So I'm going to grab this hand, pull this towards me so he can rotate and fall right here. Just like that. This is the most important part. I'm going to go over all the mistakes, because going over it and showing you how to do it is pretty easy, but I'm going to show you all the mistakes that commonly are made while doing this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over all the mistakes related to the extension, because that's very important. So if I've got his body extended, the hard part is to keep him extended as I go that way, because the tendency is as I'm going this way, I'm taking his body back where it came from. So it's hard to keep this extended out and keep that extension as I'm dropping. That's really difficult. Now the second part of extension that's hard is when I'm coming here, I'm actually extending this past my hips. Because what people tend to do is as they're coming in, they bring, as their body rotates in, they bring the arm with them, and then they start loading on their upper body. And you don't want to do that. So you've got to think of, he's extending out from his hips, and I've got to keep that extension going out from his hips while I'm getting into position. And then the next mistake is a little harder to see, but I keep the extension as I am dropping. I'm extending out as I'm dropping. So the mistake is as I'm extending, then I go to drop, and then I pull the extension back, and it comes down as I'm dropping. So the next mistake I make is position. And so when I'm going in, I don't want to come in and meet his center, because then I can't extend him over my center. So you don't want to come in, block his center from moving forward, and then it locks, so then I can't move him forward as I'm squatting. So that's the first mistake, is blocking him when you're entering. So what you want is you want a smooth transition of your hip to go down at a 45-degree angle. So as I plant my foot, I'm going to squat and meet his hip at the bottom of the squat. Okay, the position is a lot more difficult. If I'm coming in for, say, an Ikkyo Koshi Nage or Jiu Jitsu Koshi Nage, where I'm tying this, but I've got to come in and rotate at the same time, it's more difficult to get the positioning right in context to his hips. So what I've got to do is I've got to come in, and as I'm squatting, I'm going to be extending and rotating at the same time, and I'm going to pull this leg in. So I'm going to pull this in as I'm extending, and then I'm going to extend over my hips and then load and rotate. So for beginners, I always suggest coming in and having the uke grab your opposite, your lapel, so you can rotate them and they'll fall right here. But more advanced, you can actually hip throw and project the person out that way. So the mistake is to come in and start rotating him over my center before I squat. See, I'm trying to lift him from here, and it's a lot harder than if I squat and then pick him up. So the loading is the most difficult part as a beginner, and here's why. Because as I come in, the mistake is as I go down, I bend here, and then I get him on my back. And so if I try to lift him on my back, I've got a lot of strain pushing straight down. I don't have his mass loaded on my hips. I'm too high. So as a beginner, I suggest this way. Instead of going down like this and trying to get the load way down low here, the tendency, or what I suggest, is instead of squatting like this, keep your chest up, hips out, and squat like this. So there's less tendency to load him on my upper body, because he's going to slide down to my hips. As he goes down, he's going to slide down to my hip level, and he won't get on my back. So what I want to do is I want to show this load with keeping your chest up. So as I go in and I'm going to extend towards my hips, I'm going to compress, but I'm going to keep my chest up. And then you have to load on your low back because your chest was high. Now when you get more advanced, you can actually go down and get this position. So my hips are about, level with my hind end. So you're getting in this position as you get more advanced. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show the scoop method. So here, I'm going to actually extend him farther back that way. And so as I'm extending him farther back that way, I am going to scoop up, push into his body to lift him. And this is very important when you're going to do a projection throw. It's more important that you scoop his body instead of just down and lift. Okay, the rotation is the easiest because if you get the first 4 principles correct, the rotation is real easy because you've got him balanced on that center point. And I'm just going to show you some things that you can practice with that center point to see if you've done the first 4 things correctly. Okay, so if I've correctly entered, correctly extended, correctly positioned, correctly squatted, and then I correctly pick him up. Now here I can shift from leg to leg. So if I shift my weight to my right leg, he kind of goes backward. If I shift to this hip, he goes that direction. So just that shift in hips will make his body move in. So this is real easy for me to do as a nage, to throw the person, is just shifting like this. So then you can hang on to the back of his leg and just practice this seesawing effect, so to know that you've got him in the right position. And then if I want to throw him, I'll just reach out and grab this underneath hand, and then all I do is rotate him, and then I'm going to let his body just rotate around my center until he falls. Okay, one thing you can do with a Shihonage, Koshi Nage, you can use this backhand to support his waist. So as I'm coming in this position, I'm going to grab his waist. So as a beginner, this might be easier to grab the waist and then squat and then pick up and then rotate and then throw. Okay, on the load, one thing that people do is they keep a wide stance. And I don't suggest that because you can have somebody actually land on your leg. And also, as Briston's going to point out later, that it doesn't give you as much of a throw from the legs, because if I have my legs squat, I can't get my hips up as high. So if I'm going in, a lot of people will do this. They'll come into this position and then they'll rotate this way, but you take a chance of maybe putting the uke on your leg and you can't squat as well and effectively use your squat for the throw. Nice things about learning these principles is you can apply these same principles to Jiu Jitsu, to Judo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Briston apply just the principles, not teach the techniques, but just show how the principles are similar or maybe different depending on different applications in Jiu Jitsu.
I'm going to demonstrate 3 Jiu Jitsu throws to point out how these principles, these 5 principles mentioned by Paul Frank Sensei, are directly applicable to Jiu Jitsu as well. They're just expressed a little differently. Let's say Onage, I'll demonstrate the same 5 principles. I get the extension, right? I position myself, I compress, I load, and then I rotate to complete the throw. In Jiu Jitsu, we have a throw called Sore Sotokomigoshi, and I believe that is the closest, visually anyway, to Aikido's Koshi Nage. Sore Sotokomigoshi, I have to break the sleeve grip and get my extension here. As I position myself, I step in, I bring my trail leg in for my positioning, right? I compress, I load, and then I rotate. Using his arm, I'm going to draw a line on the mat with his left arm. Onage, I extend, position, compress, load, and rotate. Or Judo is called Hanagoshi, or springing hip. Now this is a dynamic throw, it's a bit more advanced, and I'm going to have to combine 3 principles at the same time. So I get my extension, okay, and then my position, compression, and load have to happen concurrently, and then I rotate for the throw. Here.
Thank you very much for watching the video, and if you'd like to like and subscribe to the channel, you can see future videos that we put out. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments section below, because I actually read through those and that gives me ideas for future videos.